Flow Unleashed.
Do you know how to overcome the frustrations and resentment that often spoil your daily experience? Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Dr. Cameron Norsworthy, scientist and high-performance coach to multiple world champions. In this show, we unpack key insights on specific topics so that you are kept up to date with the latest science and practice of human performance. I think most people could agree that gratitude is an important component of feeling good and living a fulfilled life. Indeed, most meta-analytic reviews are in consensus that gratitude is highly correlated and perhaps causally linked to well-being. For example, many studies have found that people who consciously count their blessings tend to be happier and less depressed. The effects of gratitude doesn't stop there. Performers activate a sense of gratitude to stay calm, improve their heart rate coherence and decision-making, and better access flow. Gratitude practices are also used by many coaches to help people through low points in their lives. For example, seeing the collateral beauty and being grateful for what we do have in life, even if it is for just being alive. Being grateful can ignite hope, motivation, and aspiration. In one study, psychologists Robert Emmons of the University of California and Michael McCulloch of the University of Miami asked participants to write a few sentences each week focusing on different topics. One group wrote about the things they were grateful for. A second group wrote about daily irritations, and the third group wrote about events that had affected them, with no emphasis on them being positive or negative. After only 10 weeks of writing down weekly reflections, the group who wrote about gratitude displayed more optimism and felt better about their lives. Unexpectedly, they also exercised more and reported fewer health issues than the group that focused on displeasing irritations. Martin Seligman, a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania and possibly the most famous positive psychology researcher of all, found that a gratitude intervention of writing and personally delivering a letter of gratitude to someone who had never been properly thanked for his or her kindness increased happiness more than any other happiness intervention, with benefits lasting for months. Socially, gratitude has also been correlationally linked to reduced feelings of social isolation, enhanced social relationships, improved social bonds and socially inclusive behaviors, and the encouragement of relationship formation and connections. In terms of physical health, gratitude has been associated with many physiological benefits, such as reduced headaches, muscle fatigue, feelings of nausea, as well as better cardiovascular health. So much so that in a study conducted by Redwine and colleagues, heart failure patients who participated in a gratitude intervention displayed important benefits of reduced inflammation and increased parasympathetic heart rate variability compared to those in the control group. From reducing the stress hormone cortisol in pregnant women to being considered as a natural and effective buffer against the negative effects of stress, the practice of gratitude seems to offer more than one would suspect at first encounter. In the past 2 decades, a growing body of evidence in the field of social science has found that gratitude has measurable benefits for just about every area of our lives. So much so that the Greater Good Science Center at the University of California, Berkeley, a leader in research on the science of social and emotional well-being, describes gratitude as the social glue, key to building and nurturing strong relationships. Yet, despite this academic and practical prominence, gratitude is often left out of the most important virtues, emotions, and attitudes. Today, we are giving gratitude center stage. We will discuss why gratitude is important and how it is the antidote to our biggest emotional poison. One individual who knows a lot about this topic is our guest today, Dr. Kerry Howells. Kerry has over 30 years of experience researching, teaching and presenting on the topic of gratitude. She's an author, award-winning educator, and visiting professor at Tallinn University. Her first book, Gratitude in Education, A Radical View, has been used widely to guide the development of educational programs and strategic change in universities, schools, and early childhood education.
Flow Unleashed.
Hey, Kerry, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure, Cameron.
How has your research added to the field of gratitude and resentment?
Well, when I first started researching gratitude about 25 years ago, and at that time there wasn't much available, and I was considered to be some kind of witch by many of my academic colleagues, because in those days university education was very much about objective critical thinking, and the subjective world of the student didn't really have any relationship to what university was all about. And yet when I suggested to my students at university that gratitude could really help with their learning, they started to get really interested and really responded to gratitude strategies that I was introducing. And so I persevered, and then I realized that my own gratitude was having influence on their gratitude. So then I developed a whole pedagogy around teacher gratitude. And then the teachers would say to me, yeah, but what about the leaders? So then I developed a whole pedagogy around leadership. And as I said, at the time, there wasn't much around. And I was the first person to write the first book on gratitude in education in regards to teachers and leaders. And there's been quite a few ways in which I've pioneered gratitude as a concept, because I'm a philosopher rather than a positive psychologist. And my research has uncovered a lot about how we can look at gratitude in terms of its opposite, which is resentment. And there hasn't been much written about that as well. So I think my research has really contributed to the conceptual understanding of gratitude and its opposite, resentment, and the interplay between those two, but also in its application to various fields like elite sport, all levels of education. And also I've worked with an oncologist in Sydney who was looking at the role of gratitude in end-of-life care for cancer patients. So the application of my research has been pretty wide.
Fascinating. I'm looking forward to unpacking some of those points. But firstly, how did you get into gratitude yourself? How did you become fascinated in the constructs?
I think I've always, without being conscious of it, always thought that there's a lot in life to be grateful for, and always thought that I really need to orientate myself. Not always, but I've had this kind of inherent sense of its importance in my life. But it became really clear, as I just said, it became really clear when I started teaching my students at university. I was teaching a philosophy course, and many of the students who I thought were really blessed to come in and learn this course would come in really disgruntled and dissatisfied, and they'd just come back from their Club Med holidays, or they'd just been, they're parking their beautiful car next to my old bomb in the car park, and I was really concerned about their lack of gratitude. And this was a course they all had to do, and it wasn't only me who was feeling this, there was a whole lot of other teachers who were teaching on this course. So I just, after teaching the course and really struggling with their attitude, I just stopped the third time I was teaching it and said, hey guys, what about gratitude? And they, very intriguing to me, they wanted to know more. And so together we developed a whole lot of strategies. And at that time also, most of my life I'd had a really difficult relationship with my mother. And I wasn't able to name it up as resentment, but looking back, I can see that a lot of our relationship was marked by resentment. And I suggested to my students, I've been trying to work out what they were most grateful for, and many of them would say my parents. And because of that, I started to really reflect on the lack of gratitude to my mother. Then in the end, I decided to act on a gratitude practice, which I suggested to them, which is to write a gratitude letter. So I wrote a gratitude letter to my mother, and I realized I hadn't expressed gratitude to her for many, many years. I couldn't really remember when I'd last thanked her. And as a result of that letter, our resentment towards each other really diminished. And I started to feel deep gratitude, not only towards her, but about many aspects of my life, which I was trying to reach into with gratitude, but I couldn't. And then I was able to realize how much resentment was really robbing what I call deep gratitude. And so then it kind of developed from there, because I realized that in my own life. So I had to kind of practice what I preached with my students in my own life. And through that, I was able to realize the actual real importance of gratitude. And unfortunately, my mother passed away 6 months after I wrote her that letter. So it was really good timing for me to recognize the importance of expressing gratitude to our parents and to help move away from resentment. Not an easy task.
Really powerful. And I'm really happy for you that timing, you were able to go through that pathway just prior. So just to sort of unpack, because there's a bit of confusion around some of these terms, and perhaps we'll get into gratitude later. And, you mentioned deep practice there, and we'll touch on that later. But the story you just shared is, probably one that we can all identify with. We all have resentment to individuals, either in family or otherwise. And getting over that resentment is often a hurdle, and it can taint and mar our perspective on things and change our decision making and so forth, and also just stain our experience in our interactions with them. How would you describe resentment?
So resentment is the experience of bitter indignation at having been treated in a certain way. And it usually comes as a kind of shock because of either broken expectations or being made to feel inferior. And our whole orientation to the world is really shaken up. And resentment is known as the emotion of justice, because we feel like we have to hold on to resentment to be able to make sense and to be able to make a proclamation about the seeming injustice that we feel like we've experienced. So resentment, it starts out with a feeling, but it also can become a way of being in the world, or a way of responding to a particular relationship. And the reason why it's called resentment is because I believe it needs to be resent, but it can't be, because it gets stuck in our whole psyche and we can't move on. And so as a result, we can feel like we ruminate a lot, or we can experience insomnia and a whole lot of other physical ailments, because it gets lodged in our being or in our psyche, and we can't move on from the pain or hurt that someone's caused us.
I love that statement you just said there about it needs to be resent. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Oh, yeah, that's just my play on the word. But
yeah.
One of the characteristics of resentment, that it gets stuck. And no matter how much we try to move on, we can't. So going back to that situation with my mother, I really wanted to love her and move past my resentment. But because I'd felt so wronged as a child, I couldn't do that. I couldn't move past it. So, it needs to be resent, and I've been exploring a whole lot of ways in which it can be resent positively, but often it gets resent in our bodies by causing headaches and ailments that I just mentioned, or it can come out in really dysfunctional ways in workplaces or in families or friendships, where we go over the injustice again and again through backbiting the other person or backstabbing them, even though we don't mean to be, but we keep on processing the pain to be able to make sense and be able to gain justice and be able to get reinforcement for our feelings from others. So I believe it gets resent in three ways. So the first two are really negative, but the third one, which is to proactively work on gratitude and a whole lot of other strategies that I've developed, can be a more positive way of resending resentment.
And what do you feel needs to be resent? Is it the pain or the anger?
It's the pain, the shock, the indignation, the sense of injustice, the bitterness, there's often a kind of screaming inside us that says, how could you? And so that really wants to be resent as well. It wants the other person to know that this is really not right. And it can be really little things. It doesn't have to be really traumatic. These shocks are happening to many of us, at least every week, if not every day. These little things that keep on building up and building up.
Yeah, you've talked about in some of your work, the everyday resentment, some of the causes there. The two typical ones are broken expectations and being made to feel inferior. Yes,
so examples of everyday resentment could be you not getting a promotion, even though you and everyone else around you thinks that you're the one who deserves a promotion. It could be the barking dog next door that the neighbour refuses to quieten, so you can't sleep very well. It could be your best friend telling your secrets behind your back. It could be your boss putting you down a lot in front of others, not really knowingly, but treating you really in an inferior way compared to other people. So a lot of emphasis has been given in the literature to the more traumatic kinds of resentment that fuel wars and domestic violence and genocide and things like that. But not much has been talked about in terms of the everyday resentments. And my work is trying to bring those to the fore, because I think it's the everyday resentments that accumulate and grow and can lead to the more traumatic ones. So I think we've got to really bring resentment more out into the fore and do something about it in our everyday lives. Not just and that is often hard to do, because resentment by its nature likes to be hidden, and it especially in the Western society, it comes with a lot of shame, because we want to be nice and grateful and positive, and we also feel ashamed that we're holding on to this seemingly small resentment in the face of Gaza or in the face of all the atrocities that are going on in the world. We can feel ashamed that we can't move on, and we feel like we're not strong enough to move on, so we don't really want to acknowledge that, and we certainly don't want to talk about it openly with the other person, because we feel that we should have moved on, but we can't. So it's very tricky. Resentment's a very tricky thing. And I think we've got to outsmart it, because it is so tricky.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier it's almost a way of being. So I'm imagine, have you seen in some of your research how when people hold on to resentment, it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that they create more of it in their life?
Yes, it does. And some people can be very in touch with that. Like I remember being interviewed on the radio, and there was a talk back, and one person rang in and said, yeah, but I love my resentment. I don't want to let go of it. I feel so resentful to my cheating husband 20 years ago, and now it's become my way of being in the world. And they were very proud of it as a statement, because it is a statement of justice in their mind. But as Nelson Mandela says, resentment is like drinking another person's poison and hoping it will kill them. But it's killing yourself. Like when we feel like we've got to hold on to the resentment to hurt the other person, to make them wrong. But often they've moved on. They don't really give a damn, or they might not even know that they've caused our resentment. So this is why it's very tricky, because resentment makes us feel like we're not condoning the other person's behaviour and we're getting justice, but actually we're not. We're actually hurting ourselves and hurting others who are affected by our resentment as well. The other person may not even get affected at all.
So how does gratitude unlock that hiding of the resentment and the holding on to the resentment?
Yeah, I've talked about how gratitude has this great illuminating power to do that. So, for example, when I'm talking in a big presentation, for example, I can already tell in people's minds, they're going, oh yeah, I can be grateful to this person, this person, this person, but I will never, ever, ever be grateful to this person, because they've caused me so much pain, and that would be so not real of me to do that. It's so inauthentic for me to do that. So whenever we can't be grateful to someone, that is a sign that we actually have resentment towards them. And that because gratitude and resentment are conceptually completely opposite, every time we take a step out of resentment, this is never about replacing resentment with gratitude, because that is very inauthentic, and that is just like putting a positive veneer over a negative situation, which is crying out for attention. So it's not about just keeping the status quo and going straight into gratitude, because I think that's quite dangerous. But it is very helpful to know that because they're conceptually opposite, every time we take a step out of resentment, we're taking a step towards gratitude. We're allowing gratitude to have a greater hold and resentment to have less of a hold. And that exploring that dynamic and how it works in difficult relationships can be very helpful to people.
You mentioned there just sort of flip-flopping in between the two can be dangerous. Do you mean in the sense that we forget our personal boundaries, or we negate the internal anger that might need to be expressed?
Yes, yeah. And often the only way we can get justice is to talk to the other person about the pain we feel that they've hurt us, especially if that is ongoing, like in a relationship or in a bullying situation at work, or a situation where the boss is putting you down all the time. If that's just going to continue and keep undermining your sense of self, then definitely conversations need to be had. But that's really difficult if there's a power relationship going on, or like between boss and employee, between teacher and student. And it's also one of the scariest things anyone could ever do is to actually speak about how somebody has speak directly to the person about what they might have done to have hurt us, because it takes a lot of courage to do so. So that's why resentment keeps staying stuck and can't be resent, because we're too afraid to actually confront the other person. We haven't, I think as a culture, we haven't really learned how to do that well. Although there are some countries that do it really well, like in Italy, they're just forever talking about the resentment and being very, very, and in Estonia, where I've done a lot of work, that they've got lots of words for resentment, because resentment is something that they like to acknowledge in their culture. But in Australian culture, for example, in British culture, in American culture, it's as I said before, it's quite hard and it's quite hidden, because we like to put on this nice persona. But I think in order for us to move towards gratitude, sometimes the injustice needs to be addressed in some way. And it could be through counselling and other things, but if it keeps going on, sometimes we're forced to leave the job that we really wanted to stay in, or leave the relationship even though we've got children, or, because we just don't really have the capacity to address resentments when they come up.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I often think of resentment as being, as you're talking, I'm thinking, you mentioned earlier that point of justice, and I've had resentments where I've held on to with family members, and there's this, but it's just been unfair, and I'm angry, and I feel like I need to sort of hold on to it, and it becomes a motivator, and it becomes a driver, and it fixates the perspective and the thoughts, and might end up my behavior, and then stops me seeing opportunities and all the rest of it.
Yes.
How do we move past that resentment but still feel that sense of justice?
Well, I think that it's a really important question, Cameron, because I think we can get justice without holding on to resentment. We can actually we can actually say, yeah, that has actually broken my expectations. That has actually made me feel inferior, and that is not right. But I'm going to choose not to hold on to the resentment about that. I'm going to seek justice in other ways by, for example, never being like that to anybody myself and learning from it, taking the courageous and brave move of talking about it to the other person, etc. So it requires action and it requires vigilance because resentment can take hold so quickly. But to recognize, I have this statement where I just say resentment is never okay. Resentment is never okay, even though it's natural and it's within most of us. I think we've got to make it not okay because the toxicity of it, both for our health and our relationships, the price is too high. And so to outsmart resentment, we can still seek justice, but not make resentment that way of seeking justice.
And how would we distinguish between anger and resentment, or resentment and envy?
Okay, so anger and envy and disappointment are usually the beginning stages of resentment, and if we don't express that and we hold on to it, anger and disappointment are more like emotions where we can actually move on. We can have that energy in motion and express it in some way, whereas resentment is stuck. It can't move on. And if the anger is not expressed and it comes with a sense of injustice, that's often leading to resentment as well. So you can still have anger, but it's not necessarily associated with injustice. Whereas resentment is where our sense of self or our moral code has been violated in some way.
And harboured.
And harboured, yes, harboured is a good word.
The ship has come in for repairs and never gone out again.
Yes, you've never gone out again, yeah. And grudge is a really good word as well to describe resentment. We hold a grudge.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a common expression, I forgive, but I'll never forget. And you know that feeling when somebody comes to you and says, I really forgive you, but underneath you know that you haven't been forgiven because they're never going to forget. The relationship's changed forever. You can feel their resentment even in the way they're speaking about their forgiveness. That not forget, I forgive but not forget, that not forgetting part is where resentment lives. So to truly forgive, we need to also address the underlying resentment. That's when true forgiveness happens.
Lovely.
When we say, oh, I'm not going to forget, that's us saying, I'm not going to make your action right. I'll never forgive that action by making it right. And I'll never condone that action. But we can, as I said, we can still have that statement about how we live in the world. But the emotive response of resentment underneath that needs to be shifted in order for true forgiveness to happen.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from just speaking personally here rather than academically, I think it's, you know, what's helped me in the past is being able to understand that everything changes. The past is the past and the present is the present. And I'm a different person from one day to the next, certainly a different person years after certain events. And so is that other person. And maybe I'm a too much of an optimist. But I believe everyone, you know, does things at some level because they think it's going to have a positive effect. You know, even dysfunctional habits or things that society might deem as illegal or immoral. Internally, that individual has created some kind of narrative or rhetoric that it will serve them in some way, and helping understand that has helped me to move on and actually get to that place of forget rather than just a cognitive place of forgive. Are there any sort of practical pointers that you could help listeners move from forgive to forget?
Yeah, I think that this is where gratitude comes in, because I'm not a psychologist talking purely about resentment. I'm talking about the interplay between gratitude and resentment. And I think as quickly as we can to get back to the consciousness of how these are playing out in our lives, because resentment makes us forget the good that we've received from the other person, and gratitude helps us remember the good, and that's the power of gratitude. So if we can shift, find something big-heartedness in ourselves to shift from what we feel has been taken away and move towards remembering what we've been given. That's very healing and can really speed the process on a lot. And even to go there with the person and say, look, I want to come from that space of gratitude for what we've had, not from the space of what I feel like has been taken away from me. That can be very, very powerful. And getting back to those conversations where the relationship often needs to be repaired through brave conversations about how we've been hurt. These words before having those conversations, like because this relationship matters to me, because you matter to me, I really want us to have this open, healing conversation. Those words, if a person knows that they really matter, then that can really help the conversation move on. So I think having gratitude strategies, for me, it was writing a letter to my mother, a gratitude letter to my mother, where I actually had to look for the good because I was so consumed with the bad. And that really, really helped healing on so many different levels.
I love that statement. Because you matter to me, it really drops the defensive guard and allows everyone to see the value that's trying to be created within that interaction.
Yes.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
I know you've grappled with gratitude a lot over the years, as well as technically and I guess academically trying to define the construct somewhat to help increase clarity and the cohesion of literature and so forth. How would you describe gratitude today?
Yes, it's been an evolving concept. And so I've coined this term deep gratitude because I think it's a real craft and art form and something that we should be continuously trying to master. It's easy and it's profound and it's straightforward, but on the other hand, when we're trying to practice it in relationships, there's a lot to learn. So gratitude to me is an acknowledgement of what we have received from another person or another situation, and then the active practice of giving back out of acknowledgement for what we've received. And this giving back doesn't need to necessarily be a tit for tat or with reciprocity. It can be just, for example, a teacher might be really grateful to teach at a particular school, but instead of giving directly to the school, they might give back by greeting their students with a heart of gratitude. That might be their practice. So the reason why I call it deep gratitude is it starts with a sense of appreciation for what we've received, but that's not gratitude until it's acted upon in some way, and then it becomes deep gratitude.
And is it a state, or people would often be familiar with things being a thought or a feeling, and I often talk about an experiential state, which also encompasses perspective and volition, but in your work, you've also called it an inner attitude.
Yes. I think we've got to move past gratitude being a feeling, because that's just, for example, busy teachers, most of my research is deliberately and consciously taking place in really challenging situations. So I go into really difficult schools where gratitude seems impossible. I go to really difficult countries where gratitude's really threatened because of the trauma that people have experienced. And I deliberately look at gratitude in the context of adversity. And those who are going through challenges, to hold on to gratitude for any period of time as a feeling is really hard. For example, busy teachers who are working with challenging students, they feel a whole lot of other emotions. And if we're just limiting gratitude to a feeling, they may feel that they've failed in gratitude because they weren't able to hold that feeling of gratitude for a really long time. So I like to look at gratitude as an inner attitude that we develop over time. And the way we develop gratitude as as an inner attitude over time is to consciously practice it in the midst of adversity, in the midst of difficult relationships. Then we can really develop an inner attitude of gratitude, which is pretty unshakable, and it becomes like a general outlook through which we see life. And if you meet people who haven't been embittered by the difficulties in their lives, you can see that gratitude just oozing out of their every being, every pore of their being, because they've consciously chosen to respond to life with gratitude because they're very aware of not taking anything for granted, or their life might have been threatened in some way and now they have life, like people who come back from cancer or those who've escaped war-torn areas like refugees. If their adversity hasn't embittered them, they can come through that with a real inner attitude of gratitude, and we can learn a lot from those people.
So how do you go about helping people to become grateful and adopt gratitude?
I suggest that gratitude is a choice, and that is quite contentious in situations like domestic violence or situations where you feel like, how can people actually choose gratitude in those situations? And I don't really think that they can necessarily always choose gratitude, but I think that we can, even in those situations, we can move towards having greater agency over the choices we're making about our inner attitude and how we're going to respond to the adversity in our lives. And so to be able to keep strengthening that capacity to choose comes from reflecting on what kind of attitude am I bringing to this situation, to this relationship, to my day, and to be setting yourself up for the day through various practices that I've developed by thinking about what you're grateful for in what is about to unfold, and bringing that gratitude into the day in what I call this approach I call a state of preparedness. And to take up gratitude as a practice, because our lives are really busy, they're stressful, they're complex, and we can't necessarily feel grateful all the time. But we can achieve a lot by choosing one or two people that we're grateful to, that we want to practice our gratitude towards, or one or two situations or one or two practices, and making those practices part of our consciousness until they become a habit or a way of being, and then we move on to other practices.
So developing a habit around reflecting and choosing to practice gratitude.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. And seeing it as a practice is very helpful when most of us, especially those in high performance situations or elite sports situations, for example, those of us who have a perfection mode of behavior, which many of us do, gratitude then just becomes more of a perfection way of being, and gratitude rebels against perfectionism, because we can never be perfect in our gratitude, and nor should we be, because it's something that we're practicing all the time. So even though I've been researching and trying to practice gratitude for over 25 years now, I get shown every day areas where my life needs more gratitude, and or I'll just think that I've mastered in one situation, and then another really difficult situation might come along. So I think it's an evolving practice. And perfectionism, if we're trying to be perfect in the way we express gratitude or in the way we feel gratitude, that really makes us negative about what we're not doing rather than grateful for what we are doing. So I think we've got to look at our perfectionist tendencies and the negative impact that has on gratitude.
With such little time to self-manage our own states, how would someone integrate the practice of gratitude when we've got so many things to focus on, such as mindfulness or our mindset and so forth? Where does gratitude fit into that picture?
Yes, I don't think we should make gratitude exclusive of other states or other practices. I think they all really enhance each other. So mindfulness really helps gratitude. Gratitude really helps mindfulness. But as the Roman statesman Cicero said, gratitude is the parent of all virtues, and it's the greatest of all virtues, because when we practice gratitude, we're practicing a whole lot of other sort of ways of being. For example, in that situation that I was talking about with difficult relationships, when we're truly grateful to someone who's hurt us, that takes great humility. It takes a lot of love. It takes a lot of forgiveness. It takes a lot of sense of relatedness. It takes empathy. It takes compassion, a whole lot of things that we can put into play when we're practicing gratitude. So gratitude stands on quite a few other ways of being in order for it to be true gratitude as well. So I think when we're practicing gratitude, there's a lot of things that we are bringing into play automatically, which is what makes it a very profound practice. And I think that's another reason why so much research is now being going on in a whole lot of different fields about the role of gratitude in our daily lives.
I think it's also really important from both a neural perspective and a psychological perspective, in the sense that we can be mindful and perhaps disassociate ourselves from thoughts. But unless we actively choose the solution, unless we actively embody the new habit we want to create, our neurons will keep firing down pathways of old that we've conditioned over time. And unless we actually focus on a solution, we can't build new patterns of thinking, new patterns of behavior. And if gratitude is the opposite state to resentment, then having that as a focus and proactive, as you talked about earlier, a choice, it's really important to embed that as a habit.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think a whole lot of all the research that's gone on in neuroscience is really, really relevant to gratitude. And there's a lot coming out about how it can really help us retrain those pathways as well.
So how does gratitude work? Well, behind the scenes, gratitude has a huge impact on our brain, our neurology, emotional capacity, and our ability to communicate. In examining how practicing gratitude on top of receiving psychological counselling carried greater benefits than counselling alone, even when the gratitude practice is brief, Professors Joshua Brown and Joel Wong at Indiana University suggest that several important factors may be happening behind the scenes. It turns out that gratitude may be unshackling us from toxic emotions. In their studies examining people's written diaries and responses, importantly, it was the lack of negative emotion words, not the abundance of positive words, that explained the mental health gap between gratitude writing groups and other writing groups. In short, it suggests that the well-regarded gratitude letter writing intervention produces better mental health because it shifts one's attention away from toxic emotions such as resentment and envy. When we write about how grateful we are to others and how much other people have blessed our life, it may be neurochemically more challenging to ruminate on our negative experiences. With less attention, thought, and focus on the negative, our mind naturally feels happier and healthier. They also found that gratitude doesn't need to be communicated to be impactful. Only 23% of participants who wrote gratitude letters from their studies actually sent them to the intended recipient. Yet those who didn't send their letters still enjoyed the benefits of gratitude nonetheless. While sharing the thought or act of gratitude with another is certainly more powerful, just thinking of being grateful, not necessarily acting upon it, can still shift our focus away from negative feelings and thoughts, making us feel happier. Not only does it make us feel better, it can help improve our cognitive recall. As Nancy Davis, co-author of the Thank You Project, points out in her pursuit to write 50 thank you letters to people in her life, she struggled at first to even come up with a short list of people to write to. But when she got going, the practice naturally boosted her positive emotion, which in turn helped her to think of more people to extend her gratitude to. This list ended up continuing well beyond her family and friends. She states, strengthening your positive recall bias makes it easier to see the good things around you, even when times are dark. Nancy goes on to say that the practice of writing so many letters of thanks also improved her ability to weather some of life's bigger challenges. Physiologically, gratitude has a measurable impact on our nervous system. Typically, gratitude is associated with a reduction in blood pressure and increased vagal tone, which is a sign of a parasympathetic influence on the peripheral nervous system, meaning that our physiology becomes more relaxed and composed when we are grateful. This soothing of the nervous system may be one mechanism by which gratitude works to calm the body and allow greater performance and cognitive cohesion. Strange as it may seem, gratitude can also encourage us to fuel our bodies with nourishing foods. Lisa Walsh, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of California, Los Angeles, posited that grateful people report better physical health because they tend to engage in healthy activities, such as focusing on nutrition. She found that getting people to express gratitude helped them to work toward healthier eating behaviors, like eating more fruits and vegetables and eating less junk food. Relationally, it is thought that gratitude acts like a booster shot to reminding us about the value of our interactions and how important the relationship is to us. By practicing gratitude, couples can initiate a cycle of generosity. One partner's gratitude inspires the other to act in a way that reaffirms their commitment, leading both partners to feel more connected and satisfied with their relationship. Gratitude opens the door to healthier communication styles because when grateful, we have more positive perceptions of our partners, friends, or family. As a result, we are able to listen less the distracting inner noise of resentment. We feel less defensive. We're able to trust more, voice concerns more frequently, and feel more comfortable talking through disagreements. Essentially, our distracted avoidance decreases and our communication improves. As long as gratitude is not used as an avoidance to rising emotions, the effects of gratitude can be powerful and long-lasting. It is no wonder that one study from the University of Pennsylvania reported that fundraisers who received a pep talk from their director expressing how grateful she was for their efforts made 50% more fundraising calls than groups who did not receive these grateful comments. A little bit of gratitude goes a long way. In this case, enabling employees to feel better motivated to work harder.
Flow Unleashed.
There's some good research that's coming out about the positive impact that gratitude has on heart health and also on the immune system and sleep. They're the three areas where I think there's some good research that says that gratitude can have a really big impact. And also on positive behaviors like getting enough sleep, getting more exercise, trying to have more positive relationships. Taking an attitude of gratitude can have an impact on that. But in my own research, I think the most interesting outcome for me from this is qualitative research is that there's just been this common theme that's come through, whether it's with elite sport, as elite athletes and their coaches, whether it's with early childhood educators or university students. There's this comment that comes through very often, which is that gratitude helps me feel calmer. And going back to a philosophical way of looking at that, I really believe that we feel calmer when we express gratitude because there's this underlying kind of moral imperative or way of being that's needing our gratitude to be expressed to somebody or for life itself. And when we do express it, we feel calmer. That's my hypothesis behind this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I've been inspired by the Heart Math Institute, when I've taken my heart rate coherence measures and purposefully gone into a state of gratitude, I feel calmer, my heart rate coherence is better. And, I often think of the appropriateness for leaders and decision makers in terms of them self-managing themselves into that type of state, and how gratitude can play an important part within that decision-making process for leaders involved in decisions that are affecting other people.
Yes, yeah. More broadly, I think leaders with gratitude set the whole tone of the organisation. And we know that from, like, if you're a parent taking your children to a school, and you know that the principal sets the tone of the whole school, and grateful principals set a tone of a grateful school. And even though that's a big responsibility, and it's the same can be said of a grateful CEO, the responsibility of waking up every morning and making sure that our gratitude practices are in as strong a position as possible, and the impact that's having on everybody in the organisation is pretty awesome. So I love working with leaders because I know the impact is so incredible. And I think the awareness of that can also have its own motivation, can't it, Cameron? Because people will really want to practice gratitude when they know the impact it's having. But on a smaller level as well, not so small really, parents are setting the tone for the family as well, aren't they? So parents in an attitude of gratitude goes to the kids, and that can make a big impact on the whole family.
Mm. You mentioned earlier about gratitude being a sort of a moral perspective, and Simmel argues that gratitude is the most important cohesive element for society. He goes on to say it is the moral memory of mankind, and gratitude is the bridge connecting one human being with another. And certainly in leadership scenarios, when we're trying to create cultures, and human connection is so important in that process. How does gratitude fit in from a moral perspective?
Well, just like I was saying before, I think when we go that there's a personal relationship with the world, which is not taking things for granted. And then there's the moral relationship part of that, which is that we don't take other people for granted, and that we acknowledge the absolute interdependence we have with everyone in our society. But that shouldn't stay silent, because, as George Simmel says, if that's just not expressed, then society as we know it falls apart. So we can only give and give and give for so long before we collapse, or we lose the sense of value, or we stop being motivated to do anything because we're not being acknowledged for what we give. And we're not giving necessarily to get that in return, but I think it's purely natural for us to need that recognition of what we give from another person, or from our employers, or from our teachers, for example, or our parents. And when we don't receive that, then our sense of identity and belonging is threatened. And I believe gratitude has this really important moral significance in helping us acknowledge what we receive from other people, and also in helping us receive that acknowledgement from other people. So to me, gratitude is highly relational. I don't really aspire in my work or way of being to be thinking about gratitude as this purely internal state. I think that's where it starts. But I think the social transformative huge potential of gratitude is wasted if we just stop there and think about our own gratitude. I think gratitude has to be societal, it has to be expressed to others, which is why George Simmel's quote is so powerful and relevant.
What is the deep amplification theory of gratitude?
So this is from Philip Watkins, who's a really great researcher. He's written some really great books on gratitude, and he and his colleagues have coined this term, the amplification theory of gratitude. And they start this theory by looking at the work of Baumeister, who did a whole lot of meta-analysis of psychological theory and came up with this theory, which is called bad is stronger than good, which is saying that even though we want to think good thoughts and have good memories, evolutionarily speaking, the bad overtakes the good. So we often more consciously, if we're not conscious of it, we often, our immediate go-to, our immediate thinking is bad memories, bad thoughts, in order to be able to protect ourselves. And what the amplification theory is saying, because bad is stronger than good, so it's not enough for us just to have good thoughts, because the bad thoughts will take over. But if we're grateful, then gratitude makes the good thoughts stronger. And when we're grateful, then gratitude has the capacity to make the good stronger than the bad. There we go. I've summarized a theory which is quite complex. I hope you understand. Did that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's a nice glue to, how gratitude can fit into society, and, how it can have such an impact, the butterfly effect on all things that we do.
Yes.
And why do you think gratitude for many is so difficult to practice in our relationships? Like, we all might know that gratitude is helpful, but when it comes to actually taking a minute out, taking 10 seconds out to actually practice gratitude, it often gets, put to the back of the queue or doesn't happen. How come it's so difficult? Is that because of the resentment that it might unearth, or what other factors?
Yeah, I think it is very helpful to know that we need to be vigilant about our gratitude, that it doesn't necessarily come naturally for most of us, and that we do need to put it into our realm of reflection, our practices of reflection, day and evening if we can, and to be conscious of practicing it, because there's a whole lot of things that sabotage gratitude. There's a lot. Stress, busyness, being time poor, resentment is a really big one. Feeling that we already have gratitude, that we don't need to practice it. Feeling like we're grateful people, that we don't need to change. That making our gratitude dependent on our mood, whether or not we're positive, whether or not people around us are positive. All of those sorts of things make us feel like gratitude's not important, or feel like we've got this and we haven't got this, because gratitude can slip away so easily unless we're really practicing it and being vigilant about it. Not in any kind of harsh, got to be grateful way, but just more a gentle, easy grace that we give to life itself and to our relationships, and thinking about how we can be grateful to other people. Often we're waiting around for other people to be grateful to us before we'll be grateful, or we express gratitude to somebody and then we feel like we're not going to do it again because they didn't express gratitude in return. So we make our gratitude very conditional and often very transactional, and then it loses then it's not gratitude in my view. It's lost its true flavour, which is being a lot more unconditional and something that we want to give because we have received something from life or from relationships that we just want to give back.
Mm. And just continuing that theme of, I guess, the complexities of ensuring gratitude is adopted in a helpful manner, rather than thinking we're practicing gratitude when perhaps we're not. When, for professionals who are working with other people, be that teachers, be that coaches, psychologists, or just a parent, how would you recommend people help other people to be grateful?
By practicing it themselves. I don't feel like I've got the right to ask other people to be grateful. I think we can invite our students to be grateful by giving them strategies, for example, but it's an invitation, it's not a request. And we do that in trying to link the role that gratitude can have to helping them be better people, or to help them be better learners or better soccer players or better sports people, better surgeons. But I think the onus is always on whether or not we're practicing gratitude ourselves, especially when we have any role with people, and to put 100% of the focus on that, because our inner attitude flows down to those people around us, and that's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, it's so true of so many things, even parenting.
Yes.
And focusing on our own development.
Yes.
to aid the child's development.
Yes, yeah.
And where are you hoping future research in gratitude will go over the next 5-10 years?
Generally, you mean, or my own research?
Both.
Well, I think generally I feel that we really need to take stock and to come to some agreement as to what we really mean by gratitude before we research gratitude. I think there's a lot of assumptions that we all think that gratitude is the same thing, but I think there's some very important nuances to gratitude that need to be considered before we go ahead and research it. So I think there's been a bit of a rush to get lots of papers and scientific proof, etc., but it's ignored the sociocultural dimensions of gratitude and the relational aspects of gratitude. So I'd like to see more of a philosophical investigation of gratitude being brought into the scientific investigations. And for my own personal gratitude direction, I'm always really interested in this interplay between gratitude and resentment, but I'm particularly also really interested in the cross-cultural dimensions of that. And I think the more we can recognize that recognize the cultural influences and the people from different nationalities and the differences that brings to both the concept of gratitude and also our expressions of it towards them, in order for it to be received in a meaningful way, is really, really important way to get to understand and respect the other person. So I'm really fascinated and interested in exploring that more fully. I've done some work already with Indigenous educators in regards to gratitude, and in both the South African and Australian context, and a little bit in the Maori context, and more recently in Estonia, where I went twice in 2022. But I'd like to do more of that myself. I'm really fascinated by those nuances.
What's some of the learnings that have come out so far from that?
Well, for example, in Australian Indigenous culture, you can't generalise, but in some of the countries within that, they don't necessarily have a word for gratitude, because it's already embedded in their interdependence and interconnectedness and how they are as a culture. And so they think that our overlay of gratitude and needing to thank is it's white fellas' business. It's not necessarily what they need to do with each other. So, for example, if a young teacher goes to a school in Western Australia, where there's a really high percentage of in regional Western Australia, where there's a high percentage of Indigenous kids, they might get shocked that even though they thank their kids all the time, the kids never thank them. And they might think, oh, these students don't have gratitude, but actually they do have gratitude. They just don't express it in the way that we express it. So that can lead to a whole lot of misunderstandings in the classroom. And also the best way for that teacher to go and to thank an Indigenous child in the classroom is not to actually do it with the child, but to make a relationship with the elder who's responsible for that child and go and thank that elder for the child, whatever they want to be grateful for about the child. So that's just one example.
And do you find cultures that have a more historic integration with religion tend to be more embroiled with gratitude as a natural habit or practice?
Sometimes, yep, sometimes. I think that gratitude is a pillar for a lot of religions and spiritual paths, but there's also a danger of it being over-ritualized and not necessarily sincere, because I'm not saying this for all cultures, but it could just be like a given that that's what you would do. I think there's a lot of gratitude to God that comes through in those religious societies that may miss how people can be grateful to each other, and may miss some of the need to look at resentment and the underlying, a bit, because there's kind of the pressure to be grateful if you come from a religion and you identify with a particular religion that has gratitude as its main focus, can make you not necessarily be sincere with the resentment that you might be holding. So I think in every context, we've got to look at what could be robbing us of gratitude, what could be sabotaging our gratitude. And sometimes when we're brought up with a lot of gratitude, that can be a sabotage in itself, because we take it for granted that that's how we are or how we'll be. And also resentment could be squashed down a bit further than what it would normally be in a contrasting situation. I'm not saying this is inherent in religion or not, but in a contrasting situation where resentment is very easily addressed and healthily talked about around the dinner table, for example, and not so destructive and hidden.
Yeah. No, I see that a lot in families and cultures and so forth, like you said, where too much gratitude can almost blind, or not real gratitude perhaps, but the need for presenteeism to gratitude can blind our perspective of what actually is happening, or perhaps blind our moral compass or boundaries and so forth.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Well, we're coming towards the end of our time, and I've really enjoyed this chat. So much to take away and to sort of embroil myself with. Has there been a book or a film that has been impactful for you over the years?
Well, there's been two books that have been really impactful. One is The Courage to Teach by Parker J. Palmer. And he's got this beautiful statement in, this is me as an educator. He's really helped me name up the subjective domain of the educator and name up the fact that who we are has a big impact on who we teach, how we teach. And he's got this lovely statement, which is, we teach who we are. And I really have gathered a lot of my own philosophy of teaching from that book and from his work. So thank you, Parker J. Palmer. And and there's a really great book on gratitude called Thanks, The Rites and Rituals of Gratitude by Margaret Visser. And she talks a lot about she's a sociologist, and talks about the sociocultural influences of gratitude. And she's come up with she's helped me see this wonderful word for gratitude, which is reconnaissance. The word for gratitude in French is reconnaissance, which means to recognize. And she's saying that in order for us to truly express gratitude to another, we need to recognize that person in ways that are meaningful to them. And this is where the cross-cultural elements of gratitude come in. And so I've been very influenced by her work as well. And I bring to light her work, this reconnaissance, in my 3 books on gratitude, because I think getting back to leaders, I think there's a real art form to doing this recognition really well. And I think if we can all take one person in our orbit who is not flourishing, and to recognize what we truly receive from that person, not in a patronizing way, not how they've helped us, but what we've received from them. And if we can consciously do that as a gratitude practice, then our world will be a much better place. So I'm really into this reconnaissance that Margaret Visser has brought to our attention.
And if you had one recommendation for people to start integrating a practice of gratitude today, what would that be?
Well, I think reconnaissance is a good segue to this. I think that if we could take one difficult relationship, like it's easy to, maybe we might take other relationships for granted and we need to practice gratitude more in those. But I think given what's going on in the world right now, we could do really well in terms of our contribution to world peace by taking one difficult relationship and making that relationship our gratitude practice. And not necessarily something that's not going for high fruit, but going for the low-lying fruit. So making a relationship that's a little bit out of our comfort zone, not ones that are really traumatic, and taking that relationship as our gratitude practice and looking for the good, addressing our resentment, helping us to heal that relationship, one relationship at a time, working with that relationship over time, not giving up on it, finding ways to meaningfully express gratitude to that person and working on it and recognizing in ourselves the great self-reflection that can bring, that is going to be very, very powerful if we can all do that.
Time to flip the mic.
What motivates you to do this work?
Gratitude work or my work in general?
No, I just your like this podcast. What's your big motivation for this podcast?
To unpack these important topics. There's, I think, self-development generally is quite trying to become a better human being. You know, I guess Aristotle influenced me quite a lot, and I think his comments around trying to find our diamond and live with our diamond, and you know what is a good life and what's the purpose of living and so forth is quite influential. And I think these topics are the roadmap for myself at least, and I think for a lot of other people. And there's a lot of ambiguity with these topics, and I think when we have these more deeper conversations around specific topics, it really helps to bring them to life and open them up and remove some of that ambiguity. And certainly for myself, when things become ambiguous, I just kind of glaze over them and they become nice thoughts and cognitive stimulation, but they don't become embodied practice. And my hope is that we can have these conversations and it turns into people pick up a nugget here and there, and then it integrates more and becomes more of an embodied practice for individuals. And there's a place where people can come and find out a little bit more about topics that has sort of piqued their curiosity in the past. Great.
Beautiful answer, Cameron. Somebody should interview you as well.
Yeah. All right, Kerry. Well, thank you so much for your time. And keep up the good work with the gratitude research and practice. George Simmel once wrote, "If every grateful action which lingers on from good turns received in the past were suddenly eliminated, society would break apart." In a void of gratitude, resentment and negative effect would certainly find more light of day, filling our consciousness with more unhelpful noise, marring our everyday experience. If anyone listening is holding on to resentment, please find a safe place to unearth it, share it, and express it. Resentment can be a toxin, a psychic poison that can destroy loving relationships, leaving us increasingly bitter and isolated. If you cannot resend your resentment to the individual concerned, it can help to keep identifying it and labeling it whenever you come aware of it. After which, practice self-gratitude and remind yourself of your strengths, how you wish to be treated by others, or what else you might want to be grateful for with yourself. Gratitude is an attitude and practice, not a destination. So do not worry about having to be grateful or feeling ashamed if you're not, or if resentment surfaces. It is about building grateful habits. Take one relationship at a time and allow yourself to develop a practice of gratitude. terms of being a facilitator to the growth of others, being open to hearing about another's resentment can not only help the individual dissolve their psychic poison, but can also subconsciously give others permission to identify and unearth their own resentment. Creating a safe and trustworthy environment for people to share their resentment and feelings can be one of the most powerful actions a leader can take. As a leader, coach, or partner or parent, helping others deject their resentment is great, but one of the most destructive responses is no response at all. Though responding doesn't mean we need to solve other people's grievances or disappointment, even if we are the accused. As long as their resentment has been acknowledged in a respectful way, giving unconditional positive regard to someone's vulnerability can have life-changing impacts for them. Looking out for signs of resentment, particularly in the prevalence of undermining behaviour, and allowing those around you to feel comfortable to voice their grievances directly, may be one of the most important relational things you do in your personal and professional relationships. If you want to learn more about Kerry Howells, please visit the show notes. Thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to get notified when our next episode drops. The more people that subscribe, the better I can make the show for you. Equally, please leave a review. Your review will go a long way to helping others find this pod. Until the next time, thank you for listening to Flow Unleashed.